Okay. Welcome. Okay, so we are here. Topic one: Industrial and Systems Engineering, 6:30.
Human operator in complex systems.
All right. So if you haven't watched topic 0, please do make sure to do that so you get the basics of the course. There's also a homework 0, and this is topic 1, and there will be a homework 1. Note, as often as I remember to, I'll try to point out where in the textbook that you can find the material behind. I guess I would say what I'm lecturing on is greater than what you'll find in here, but this is an excellent compliment. All right. So topic 1.1, right? So just to go over some basic definitions, you've heard a few buzz terms: human factors, ergonomics, human systems stuff, and then a little bit of the history of the science, or why, what I call my primary professional affiliation as a human factors engineer. Where did that come from? Where did it grow out of? All right. So what is it? And we have, just like we had in the previous lecture with INCOSE, and that's the systems engineering sort of international authority. We have that for the field of human factors and ergonomics. Gets a little confusing, which is why we always say human factors and ergonomics. That is the combined, that set of words is the field. But also if you go to different parts of the world and you say I'm an ergonomist versus I'm a human factors professional, that sometimes means different things in different parts of the world. So I'll try not to be too confusing. We'll go to the most international source here. The IEA is the International Ergonomics Association. And so, yes, the science, and I've underlined the key things here, right? And see how much this resonates with what we were talking about in topic 0 about human systems, right? The scientific discipline concerned with the understanding of interactions. That is one of the key aspects among human other elements of a system. And we talked about systems engineering and how interactions are key to how to think about a system, systems thinking. The profession that applies theory, principles, blah, 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 and overall system performance. So again, the holistic sort of perspective, how well does this system involving humans work? Well, let's look at the overall score for the game and not at the individual performance of single players. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I hope I made the right analogy in topic 0 with regard to how a sports team is a human system. All right. So interdisciplinary is a term you've now heard me say several times in regard to this field. And now here's the key distinction that I like to make. It's maybe an unfair simplification, but when people ask me, what's the difference? Because, okay, so a large segment of the human factors community comes to it from psychology. We're an engineering college and department, and so I'm an engineer, so I come at it from the engineer's perspective. And the way, this is again my distinction, but the engineers are first and foremost problem solvers, whereas a psychologist may be first and foremost a scientist understanding the mind. So I always make it like there can be psychology that's applied to solve problems. I'm not saying that's not there, but as the engineering angle, human factors engineering, we want to solve problems. So we apply what we're doing. Okay. So we're applying to design, right? So jobs, workspaces, equipment, products or devices, technologies, organizations. There's going to be a lot more detail given in the second part of this topic about how we can apply this field. All right. Okay, there we go. Okay, the history, right? So And I'm going to trace this back to the early foundations of industrial engineering. Okay, so industrial engineering, systems engineering, human factors engineering, each of these has sort of a a lineage, right? So I'm going to go back as far as industrial engineering, and so the 1890s, 1920s. This is when it became apparent that it's beneficial to study the minutia of work, how it's performed. This is when time studies started being introduced and then used for to improve these systems. Taylorism is a term you maybe have heard as an industrial engineer. It's Frederick Taylor being one of the more notable early, I guess what we now call industrial engineers, and applying the aspects of these minutia, time studies. How long does it take this worker to do this? What if we switch the order of those tasks? And looking at measures of time as like a holistic sort of measure for how well the work can be performed. Now the Gilbreths. Okay, so these are noteworthy people that I would say are industrial engineers, and then you'll also kind of see how this works with humans and human factors. So the Gilbreths, this is maybe a more well-known. So we have the Taylorism, Taylor thinking, and then the Gilbreths, and they were a married couple, Frank and Lillian. And if you have ever seen any of these early, that's like a long exposure photograph where the person is performing a task and there's a little light affixed to various fingers, and so they can then study the literal distance that a particular human joint might move, and the number of times it does that. And if we then can look at things like, well, what are productivity rates over time per motion, what are injury rates, because injuries at this time we started realizing not only are we hurting people, we're hurting our systems if we have workers that are not healthy. So early motion studies, that was kind of a lot of the beginning of that sort of thinking. All right, so yes, workers' mental and physical well-being both contribute to the overall success of this system, both in a humanitarian way and in an economical way, right? All right, good. So the Gilbreths, another way that you might know their name is if you take their name sort of backwards and you say Thurblig. So Thurblig is a unit of work. You can Google that right now if you want to pause and look that up. But it's used in work study, and you can define one unit of work like pinch bolt as a Thurblig. So we can count Thurbligs when that matters. Anyway, another reason you may know the Gilbreths is from this story, Cheaper by the Dozen, written by the two Gilbreths, if you've heard that term. And it's kind of, I gather it's about sort of like industrial engineering principles applied to a household and having, a large family of children. They're easier to manage by the dozen, I suppose. And then if you haven't, if you're thinking, why does that sound familiar? More recently, we have this, Steve Martin. I love Steve Martin. I don't know that I've seen this movie though, but anyway, based on their family experience and kind of a more modern reimagining of it. So that's Steve Martin, the industrial engineer, and his wife, the industrial engineer. All right. Okay. So turn of the century, I guess 20th century, adjacent to industrial revolution sorts of progress here. We have sort of the seedlings of looking at the human in the system, analyzing the system and how a human's role in it scales up to the large scale productivity. And also, why is it important for us to make sure our workers are healthy, both from a humanitarian standpoint and from, in terms of the productivity of our system. And so with that in mind, now, progress and let's make the world better. Now let's go to World War and tear each other down. And so we shift our, a lot of nations, but I'll talk from the United States perspective. But we shift our priorities towards, protections, defense, and offense, I guess, also. But there were some interesting ways we could apply the thinking of how does a human work in a system to now the military system and to the goals of of a military. And so the traditional style of thinking was we find what a certain what a person can do, and we put them in the role that best suits them. It's a human-centered sort of approach. I mentioned that buzzword in the previous topic. Let's look at what this human can do, and let's fit the system around them, as opposed to forcing a different role that doesn't suit the human. But then the question was, we've got the best of our best in our aircrafts, and this is the first time in history when they had these advanced aircraft. We went from biplane days, Wright brothers, to World War I to World War II extremely rapidly. Now we're with bombers and jets and advanced aircraft. So why are our best of the best pilots we're putting in these machines, why are they crashing? How do we get any better here if we're not already picking the best people? Taylorism says, well, we just need to find better people to be pilots, but there aren't. And so this is where we had other foundational members of the human factors community, and I like to point out Alphonse Japanis. He's a name that was very foundational to this field and very instrumental in the growth of students in this field. So if you look at the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, you'll see the best student paper award has for 20 years or so been named after it. It's been called it's the Japanis Award. So anyway, Japanis was Army lieutenant, a aviation safety early expert, and a psychologist. And so he's looking at the human motion, the human minutia involved in piloting an aircraft, and recognizing, hey, there's maybe a disconnect here. If we can study this sort of human interaction in a controlled context, like, Alphonse Japanis is thinking, I don't want to get in the jump seat behind the pilot in a single cockpit aircraft and ask him too many things while he's trying to fly. But let's study how humans will perform these tasks, and let's see if we can find an answer to why we're not getting the performance that we would expect out of our best of the best. Okay, yes, I guess he's got a quote there, right? And he really likes his profession. Me too. All right. Okay. So note here, the author, Alphonse Japanis here. So this is a classic study here. I like to reference this one in things like midterms, hence the, right. Okay. So very noteworthy. What Japanis had found is that in some of the early aircraft, and then I wish this was a better picture, but you can imagine all of these, controls right here, which are, if you can imagine, I'm flying an aircraft, I'm probably looking, and I should be looking out the windshield as much as I can. And so I'm not, maybe I've also got like enemy combatants in the air or something. So it's a very difficult task. It's surprisingly difficult, maybe, and one that doesn't get clearly identified until you study it, to look down and make sure I'm grabbing the right control. And if these are functionally different things like flaps, slats, throttle, which they are, for the engines on either side, you don't want to get those confused. And so, well, they would say, well, you just look down, you just count, I need the third one, 1, 2, 3. And then, in the study of, well, why are humans having trouble flying these aircraft? They found, well, there's a difficult transition here in shifting attention. And so what happens is people tend to do a little more guessing and a little more proprioceptive assumption. Like if my arm is about here, I feel like I'm on the right control. And what was missing is the haptic feedback. And so what you see in this picture here is a redesign. This is more what you'll see pretty standard in like modern cockpits. And you'll notice that they are visually very different. But if you don't have the ability to look away from, the intense visual scene in front of you, or it would hurt you to do so, it would hurt your performance to do so. Now I have an alternative way to be fairly confident I've got the right control, so I can feel the difference in shape. So what you see here is, an Army or an Air Force personnel wearing blindfold, so she can't see, and then, identifying and distinguishing these different controls. So I've actually used this citation and essentially this slide when I've given expert witness testimony for like wrongful death lawsuits. And if anybody ever wants to ask me about that world, it's very interesting. I have some studies. I won't take up the lecture time for it. But I talk about control confusion and the assumed or the necessary orientation of visual attention, and how if they can't haptically differentiate controls, it's a completely reasonable thing to get them confused. And if those controls are confused, this can lead to accidents. So yes, I've had some experience with that. All right, moving on. Okay, so after World War II, thankfully, the world didn't completely end. And so now we can turn all of our human science that we learned and all of the, the scientific momentum they had for studying things like human perception, visual, haptic, auditory perception, things that we're going to be talking about, in the first half of this class. And you saw a number of academic institutions then that were formed after the war. So most notably, the one at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is still, I have friends and colleagues who are faculty and our Air Force enlisted, persons who work at these labs today. The U.S. Army also had a similar, I don't have as direct connection there. But Johns Hopkins, this is where Alphonse Chapanis went. So this guy, after the war, he then was the founder and basically the key person at this laboratory. Illinois and Ohio State as well. So these were, some of the earliest, what we would call human factors sorts of research labs. All right, so now 1949, we start to say, hey, we've got enough of a community here coming together to talk about how humans work in systems. They didn't use those terms, I'm sure, but in effect. And so now, what are we going to, how can we formally, tie ourselves together here? So they had this conference in Oxford. And so, note the interdisciplinary nature of the scientists coming into this. Anatomists, human anatomy, physiologists, psychologists, industrial medical officers, IEs, right? Work study engineers, another example of the subdivision within industrial engineering. So everybody's coming together, illuminating engineers. Well, what sorts of light levels do we need for humans to be able to do proper work, right? And that'll be a topic 3, illumination. So here, this is where the term ergonomics was born, Greek ergos for work, nomos, natural laws. So it's a natural law of how work, and I suppose the unwritten part of that is the humans in work. So became the Ergonomics Research Society, and internationally, this is the the UK's Institute for Ergonomics and Human Factors. In the United States, about a decade later, we have the Human Factors Society, added the human factors and ergonomics in the United States. Here is the link to that professional society. This is my #1 professional society. If you are interested in this science, in this field, it's kind of an essential group to be at least familiar with, and if not a member of. So if you have questions about that, if you're interested in joining at any point, I can, you need like a faculty sponsor, and I'd be I'd be proud to sponsor any of you. All I have to do is say yes. I just have to vouch for you. But for students, I believe it's something like $35, at least in 2022. I believe it's like $35 a year. So it's not nothing, but it's much less than whatever I have to pay, 600 or something. All right, there you go. So check it out. Great website. You can go and look at specializations within there, and I will talk a little bit more about that at the end of this. All right, so timeline still, right? So now we have the space race, right? And very exciting time, very complex technologies, just like with World War II. We have humans trying to do something incredibly difficult in an incredibly complex technological system. And we want to make sure it gets exactly right. These are still shots from Apollo 13 and the story behind that. If you don't know it, I would recommend watching the movie, the Tom Hanks movie, Apollo 13. But I mentioned in the previous class, Dr. Copa and Houston, we have a problem, and he was Houston. So I like to think of, this is Dr. Copa. I know it wasn't him, but I'd like to think of the characters in the movie as, oh, which one was Dr. Copa. So anyway, the idea here was we have a human system, we have capabilities, and if you don't know the story, in essence, they repurposed some filtration aspects of the system in order to maintain enough oxygen to survive a re-entry. And it was really kind of a hack together with the pieces that we have. And so you had some really brilliant improvisation, creative thinking. And that's going to be an emphasized point that I always make with humans in a system. Humans can think outside the box. Humans can improvise. And so as artificial intelligence gets stronger and stronger, it's still a deterministic system. It's still something that has a random number seed at some point. And the human brain, as far as we understand it, is still capable of being truly spontaneous, as much as if you want to debate that, that's an office hours thing too. All right. Okay, 1970s. Now we have, a return to the workplace, after the World War, and we are also recognizing, hey, our technologies are allowing us to be more productive. Let's also make sure that we're protecting our workers, because we know the value of that. So NIOSH is formed. So this is sort of the think of this as like the research branch of workplace safety. So the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, this is about keeping our public healthy. NIOSH is sort of like keeping workers in the workplace healthy. So occupational safety and health. And it's a research sort of branch. And you'll hear me talk about, there's NIOSH, and that's the research branch. And then there's OSHA. And OSHA is, I think of them as more of the enforcement branch, right? So they're the ones, NIOSH might be the ones that say, here are safe levels for noise exposure, auditory noise exposure for a worker in a given day. NIOSH would do the research to determine that. OSHA would be the police that say, okay, well, if you're going to be, OSHA compliant, you need to have, have your sound levels. Otherwise, we can come in and enforce that you do, mitigations to change your, your noise system. All right. So you'll hear more about that in the hearing and noise lectures. All right. 1979. This is a formative moment in what I call cognitive systems engineering. So if you want to talk about the tree of science here, this is where I usually start my ISEN 631 cognitive systems engineering class. We start by talking about 3 Mile Island. And what happened there was a very interesting series of combined inputs, some of which were human error, according to how we define that, and some of which were design factors. And these all combined in an interesting, complex way and led to a disaster. Now, nobody died. Nobody was even seriously hurt from this. So in that sense, it's the best kind of disaster. But of course, it had ecological, it was not without consequences. But we learned a huge amount from this. Why did this happen? How can we make sure this doesn't happen again? And it was very much kind of the inception of, let's think of this nuclear power facility as a system, and how cognitive work is performed between the humans and the technologies. And if you don't, I don't know if I go into too much here. The essence of it was, it's oversimplifying to boil it down this much, but the interesting point for this class boils down to an indicator light. And so, is the valve closed or open? Is the light on or well, is the light here or there? And essentially, the human mental model was, I think if that light says the valve is closed, or if the valve is, I can't remember if it was supposed to be closed or open, but it was stuck. The valve was stuck and was not moving. And what this light was indicating, this light, and I don't know that it was this one, I'm just picking one out, but what the light indicated was the electrical signal to the valve, not the physical state of the valve. So the valve is stuck, you send the signal to close or whatever, it's not closing, but the light says it's closed, right? So this was a basic misunderstanding, or basically a buggy mental model that the operator had, but also a very reasonable buggy mental model. And so now we got to say, well, how much of this was, you know, the fault of the design, right? Or the design, I don't want to say fault, but how much is the human operator to blame, and how much is the interface that they're dealing with actually problematic? Okay, there it is. That's the light. Okay. All right, good. Now, 1988. Okay, USS Vincennes. Now, this is during the Persian Gulf War. If you're not familiar with that, it was United States and versus Iraq. I think sorry, I'm underinformed, but I'm sure there were other. Kuwait was okay. I don't need to get into you can Wikipedia this, right? So Persian Gulf War. All right. So the United States is in the Persian Gulf. This is, you know, near Iraq and Saudi Arabia and that region. And there are a lot of other countries, and there's a lot of airspace there. And so there's the war section. There's the section where you don't want to be unless you're you know, engaged in a military operation. And there is also a need to, like, you know, okay, let me just get to it here. So we had the United States is the USS Vincennes. That's the US craft. And you had an operator whose job is to basically watch a radar and determine, hey, is anything coming at us that we have to be concerned about? And it is probably not uncommon, or not too uncommon, I would say, that you would have, you know, a civilian or a peaceful aircraft entering into airspace where you maybe need to track them, especially during wartime here. So there's an Iranian passenger jet. So Iran was not involved in this war whatsoever. This was a neutral party. This is a civilian passenger jet, and it enters this airspace. So the American officer, right, or the American person at the center of this is hailing that aircraft and saying, hey, who are you? You know, identify yourself. There is a lot of stress, a lot of confusion. There is a language barrier, certainly here. There are breakdowns in communication. And now you have somebody who is under immense stress, is trying to process information that is ambiguous. We'll talk about, you know, topic 8, ambiguous information, you know, or ambiguous communications. And under the stress of, this might be an incoming aircraft who's going to kill me and all of my comrades and my, you know, my everybody that is immediately on this boat. That's an immensely stressful sort of context to make decisions like, do I shoot this aircraft down or not? And of course, made the wrong decision and ended up shooting down a peaceful neutral aircraft. This was a huge black eye, as it should have been, for the United States, but it's also a human system issue that isn't entirely this one operator's not all of the fault should be on this one operator. And so why is this a formative event in, human factors and ergonomics? It's because it was one of the first times where there was enough motivation to really fund research for decision making under immense stress. And that's actually a lot of what the research that I try to do these days is looking at the contexts in which people are under unusual levels of stress or workload or emotional load, and how that fundamentally changes the way that they'll process information or make decisions. Also then the system approach here, let's make people less susceptible to making bad decisions that when it's due to the effects of stress. And so this is a program, TADMUS, Tactical Decision Making Under Stress. It's the kind of research that, tries to prevent this sort of problem from happening in the future. And it is studying how humans work and designing things that can human system solutions here. So this is human factors engineering all the way. All right, good. 2000. So we're getting closer now. This is a quote that I used in my dissertation at University of Michigan. I love this quote. I've used it actually in several papers. So the Institute of Medicine put out this report that said humans are committing errors all of the time, and in healthcare it's really, really bad, and this is leading to a lot of people dying. So 98,000 deaths annually in 2000. By preventable medical errors, meaning, or the subtext here is doctors, nurses, care professionals, stop being such klutzes, stop being, hang on. That's my error soundbar. I hope you can hear it. Stop being such three stooges and killing people. And, if you look at this in context, this is saying that, basically things that if you just paid a little closer attention, and I'm being intentionally like, here, I'll do this way.
If you just did a better job of paying attention.
Now I'm being a character, right? But this is saying, this is an unacceptably high number, and I agree with that. But let's not point at the doctors alone or the nurses alone and say, why are you so clumsy? We need to look at the whole system. We need to look at things like, well, what about the fact that nurse was forced to work for 12 hours 3 days in a row, things like shift work. And we know now scientifically how that can affect people's productivity, people's error likelihood, right? Okay. We also could look at things like, well, how are we, so one of this is the stat that's really great. If we had the safety record in aviation that we do in medicine in 2000, it would be the equivalent of 1.5 jumbo jet crashes every day, or essentially 3 jumbo jet crashes every 2 days. And the fact that sounds ridiculous, because when there is one jumbo jet crash, it is international news for years, right? We're always talking, we're always talking about recent tragedies with large aircraft, because that industry is so safe. They're incredibly rare, which is what makes them noteworthy. And if we had a similar safety record in medicine, you can see the comparison here. So, anyway, so along with my rant about let's not only blame the doctors and the caregivers, let's look at some of the other design factors of our healthcare system that encourage, or at least make these types of errors more likely to occur. There you go, some additional stats, just in case you want to use this for your own statistic, on your upcoming report. It's really good. And you can find it online. It's a free online, because it was released by the Institute of Medicine. You can find it. All right. Okay, so with technological advances, I don't want to, you can say every 10 years we have a new technology, but kind of, right? So if you can sort of follow the progress of technology and how it is integrated into human life, we kind of have the need for human factors to now look at this new type of interaction shortly following the introduction of something. So usually the very first time, there's a product on the market, it bombs. and then people figure out why it bombed, and it has a lot to do with how the humans would interact with it, and they fix that, and then the products are great, right? So computer hardware in the 60s, software in the 70s, we saw a rise in nuclear power in the 80s. That's also when, the 3 Mile Island really kind of kicked off a lot of attention on that sort of complex system. The internet sort of started to boom, and automation in the 90s. I say automation, one noteworthy thing was a transition from traditional steam-based gauges in aircraft to what we call a glass cockpit, and a lot more advanced automation in aircraft. That was really a huge transition in the early 90s, and it led to a lot of interesting problems that weren't before observed with automation and humans. And it was kind of, in cognitive systems engineering, we talk about automation and automation surprises and the ironies of automation. These were kind of like the formative times for that, and that had a lot to do with aircraft automation. Okay, now, where are we? We're already in the 2020s, right? So I'm sort of speculating here to some extent, but we have increasingly intelligent systems and smaller and wearable computers. The fact that we have supercomputers in our pockets or even on our wrists, I'm not wearing mine right now, is amazing. And if you told that to me, well, even 20 years ago, that's incredible. But now we're in the age of artificial intelligence. A lot of the research I'm doing now is how can humans interface with artificial intelligence? How can we make that a smooth interaction? Okay, we did it. So that's our history. Now, just to kind of break down the field a little further so you can see where I'm coming from when I say in different parts of the world, these words mean different things. So if you take the entire set, human factors and ergonomics, this encapsulates humans in cognitive sense, the cognitive factors that affect their performance. So, things like attention and intuition in controlling and interface design. Physical factors, things like how do we move things, perform, exert work on the physical environment, and social factors and examples like how do you form a coherent or a well-functioning team, that communicates well and that has, emphasizing everybody's strengths. Okay, so a little extra detail here. If you go to other parts of the world, I would say, and you say, hey, I'm a human factors person. So I put it in quotes because I don't want you, the answer here to the midterm question is the field is called human factors and ergonomics complete. But this is kind of where those two ends come from. So, and I mention it that way because it's all kind of blended together. So it's really hard to say, no, you're a human factors versus your ergonomics. You're a professional within that realm. Okay, so perception, this is energies in the environment become a mental experience inside your cognitive system. And how does that work, and how can we promote that, in the environment? The limits and the capabilities of attention. How do you direct attention? One of my favorite things to do in ISCN 635 is to draw the connection between stage magic, so being a stage magician, and being really good at directing and essentially conducting people's attention, and how you can use those same principles in things like interface design. So, whereas the stage magician is maybe about misdirecting and is, for nefarious reasons, guiding your attention. But it's a very effective, once you understand the science of how that works, it's very applicable to let's guide people's attention to the stop sign so they make sure they see that, or whatever. Okay, so similarly, memory, decision-making, in any sort of cognitive work, and learning. So I always like to make that connection as well. If I'm an expert in how humans process information, I should apply that to the way that I deliver material to you. I'm trying to give you material in a format that is maximally processable, right? As a cognitive human factor. All right. So we study these things, and then there's the design part of it, right? So there's always we understand these things, but then what do we do with it? We use it to solve problems. So designing workspaces, tools, et cetera, to accommodate our cognitive strengths and to to avoid the problems of the limitations. All right. Physical factors, other parts of the world, maybe this is called ergonomics. Okay, so and this will be roughly kind of what we talk about the second half of the course. Human body dimensions, anthropometry. This, anthro is man or human, pometry, measurement. Biomechanics, and if you can look at a machine that does work and do things like statics or dynamics assessment, you can do the same thing for the human body as a machine. And we can look at things like the moment of the force moment. Sorry, I'm saying the wrong thing. The moment about my elbow. And how does that relate to whether or not I'm going to get an injury if I'm doing a hammer all day, right? So we'll look at that sort of thing. Injury risks, and then metabolic processes in performing work. So this is sort of like, how does your diet and your hydration and your oxygen levels intake relate to work output? All right, and we're designing in these cases to accommodate those physical aspects of humans in workplaces. Okay, social factors then, sometimes this is called macro ergonomics. So we look at it, I guess, from a macro perspective. Has a lot more to do with social person-to-person interactions. There's a lot of overlap with management sciences here. Things like emphasizing strengths, personality testing, that sort of thing, and making a functioning system of people where the person-to-person interaction is critical. What you see here, the reason I used this picture is this is a nursing sort of call station in a hospital wing, and what you can see is these are probably like I don't know, ICU units or something here. And what's interesting about this is they'll locate these, at least when there's an effective one, they'll have these call stations right in the middle of where everything can be seen and everyone can see them. And this kind of creates this communication hub that's very effective for kind of hands-off, like a handoff from one nurse to another nurse. Hey, go and handle, can you handle that room over there? And everybody can see everybody. And so this is kind of an application of a macroergonomic design, is let's design this workspace to really, to really support the types of communication that we will need for this system to work well. All right, it's interdisciplinary. I'm not going to read this. You can press pause and read it yourself. But what you see here are just a whole bunch of different backgrounds that all tie into and all might be, considered, like I've got two majors, industrial engineering and human factors. They're going to go together very well. So you may come to this course, you may come to this field from any of these angles, and you are you're on the right path. All right. This comes from, I think maybe it's even an earlier version of the textbook. But I think it does, again, what it shows here is kind of the relationship among close to the same fields, but it also really just kind of illustrates that if we're going to be human scientists and we're also having this systems sort of perspective, we need to understand the human holistically, or we need to make sure that we're considering the physical and the cognitive aspects of how humans interact in a system, and we're using all of our sciences together and to solve these problems. All right. Okay, I already mentioned the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, largest in the world. Last I checked, it's about 5,000 members. I don't know what the latest is. Check it out. The IEA is international, I guess the umbrella organization that HFES, I guess, would be under. And similarly with IIE, or sorry, IISE now. Oof, we fixed that live. I'll fix it live. Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers, and I'm sure that I'll have to look up the. I'm guessing they have a different one of those now address. So anyway, I will post that in the comment section of in the discussion board. Fix that. Good. So and again, this is maybe not completely up to date, but check out the list of technical groups offered or at least supported by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society. Think of these as like the specialization within I'm interested in humans in those systems. So I'm personally pretty active in cognitive engineering and decision making, in the healthcare technical group. Perception and performance is probably my main one. Surface transportation also, and I think there's probably a couple more that have been added since I last updated this slide. But check them out. You'll likely find something that overlaps with your individual interests as well. Resources, check it out. You can use this slide for reference. I'm not going to read through it. In general, our flagship journal is called Human Factors. Also the journal Ergonomics, mixing these terms all over the place. But all of these are excellent, top-notch journals. These are excellent, top-notch conferences and conference proceedings. We are going to use military handbooks and standards in this class. We're going to use them pretty often, actually, because they provide some pretty nice, guidelines, design guidelines, and science and data sets that are freely distributed. Right. And we also have a NASA standard that I'll post as well. All right. I think that's it for this. Great. So tune in next time for general guidelines in human factors science. All right.